Hello, I'm Mark Esper, former United States Secretary of Defense and the inaugural John S. McCain Distinguished Fellow at the McCain Institute for International Leadership here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us. I'm proud to welcome you to another installment of our program. Today, I'm honored to welcome another longtime friend of the United States, the current Minister of Foreign Affairs of Taiwan, His Excellency Minister Joseph Wu. Relations between the United States and Taiwan remain strong. They grew under the previous administration as we both faced increasingly bad behavior by China, and they continue in the Biden White House. In fact, I was pleased to see the White House reaffirm the U.S. commitments to Taiwan last year when it said, quote, "Our position on Taiwan remains clear. We will stand with friends and allies to advance our shared prosperity, security, and values in the Indo-Pacific region. We maintain our longstanding commitments as outlined in 3 communiques, the Taiwan Relations Act, and the 6 assurances, and we will continue to assist Taiwan in maintaining a self-sufficient defense capability." As we know, Taiwan and the United States are longtime friends and partners in the Indo-Pacific. The relationship between our 2 countries goes back many decades and is bound by our shared history, values, common goals, and familial links. Economics, technology, geopolitics, and other factors bind us as well. But nothing looms as large and menacing, nor draws us together more closely than the growing threat of a China that continues to build, modernize, and flex its military capabilities. Importantly, this year will also mark the 26th anniversary of the first free and direct elections in Taiwan in 1996, a troubling fact for Beijing that they prefer to ignore. It was during that time period that I was a senior captain and war planner on the Army staff at the Pentagon, working on various plans for the Pacific, including PRC aggression in the Taiwan Strait. So as someone who has both worked on these issues for a quarter century and has been able to watch Taiwan progress in many important ways, it is a real treat to discuss some of these matters today. Indeed, we have the perfect guest to help inform, enlighten, and guide us on these many matters. Minister Joseph Wu has served in a variety of high-level political roles throughout his esteemed career. Previously, he held positions with the Office of the President, the National Security Council, and the Democratic Progressive Party. And as I mentioned, Minister Wu is a champion of the historic U.S.-Taiwan partnership. So it is my honor to welcome him here to discuss democracy, the One China policy, Taiwan's status, the PRC's bad behavior, security, free trade agreements, and many, many more. Minister Wu, Joseph, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. It's my distinct honor and pleasure to be able to chat with you this morning.
Well, thank you. I'd like to start by asking you a little bit about the McCain Institute's namesake, Senator John McCain. As you know, last year, President Tai of Taiwan was deservedly awarded the John S. McCain Prize for Leadership in Public Service by the Halifax International Security Forum. It also seems that Senator McCain was one of the first to congratulate President Tai on her victory in January of 2016. What did Senator McCain mean to you and the people of Taiwan?
He means a lot to Taiwan, and he's a very significant and important figure for the Taiwanese people in our relations with the United States. I'm very glad you mentioned about the John McCain Award for our president, and I think it's highly symbolic in recognition of President Tsai's contribution to defend Taiwan and also to defend democracy. And as President Tsai mentioned when she received the award, that this is not just a recognition of her, but a recognition of Taiwan people and the place willing to fight against communism, willing to stand up for democracies. So we are highly appreciative of receiving this award. And John McCain, when he was serving in the Congress, has been a highly supportive figure for the Taiwanese people. Every time there's a need for the Congress to speak out in the defense of Taiwan, he's always out there. And he's a champion for Taiwan's security. And he's a champion for Taiwan being a democracy, fighting against communism. So to the Taiwanese people, he is a hero. And I know that he is also a war hero for the United States, but to Taiwan, it means a lot more than that. And we will treasure his support, and we will remember him forever.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Those are great reflections about a great man who many miss, of course, and certainly now with all that is happening in Europe with regard to Russia and Ukraine. Well, let me jump into the first question, more topical, and that is this. On January 28th, not long ago, Taiwan said it would not participate in the opening ceremony of the Olympic Winter Games. On February 4th, it reversed the decision, citing pressure from the International Olympic Committee. Reports noted that the Taiwan's delegation did not use the name Taiwan on its national team uniforms, the Taiwanese anthem, or carried the island's flag during the opening ceremony. How are the Olympics being used then by China to suppress Taiwan, as your officials cautioned?
This is one of those events or organizations or activities that Taiwan feels suppressed by the Chinese side. I will start from a couple of stories about Taiwan's international participation. Back in 2003, Taiwan was hit by SARS very hard, and we appealed to the international support, especially to the WHO. But the WHO did not send anyone to Taiwan until it was a serious outbreak. But when the WHO experts came to Taiwan, they were prohibited by the WHO to speak to the Taiwanese government officials who are dealing with the pandemic at the time. And back in 1998, Taiwan was hit very hard by enterovirus, and it hit young children, very small children. And Taiwan again was appealing to the international support, especially the WHO. And in 1998, nobody came for Taiwan. So this is a kind of situation that people understand that we need to find all kinds of opportunities so that we are able to participate in international activities, so that Taiwan can be seen on the international stage, or Taiwan can make contribution to the international community. And Olympic is one of them. You know, we were in negotiation with the International Olympics Committee for Taiwan's participation. But the end of the negotiation was Taiwan is able to send our team to participate in the International Olympics event, but we need to use a name that we don't like, which is Chinese Taipei. But fortunately, we are participating as an independent member. We are not any part of other teams like China. Mm-hmm. But even so, the Chinese continue to twist our names or our way of participation, like calling us as Taiwan, China, as if we are part of China. Or sometimes they like to put us right behind Hong Kong and Macau to show to the international community that actually Taiwan is part of them. So this is the Chinese way of suppressing Taiwan's international participation. And it goes much beyond than just the International Olympic event. Mm-hmm. Our name, as being called by other countries, are also subject to a lot of manipulations or twists. Or our names in international corporations sometimes are also twisted into Taiwan, China, or Taiwan province of China. And we hated it. And Taiwan wants to be called Taiwan. This is the name of the place. And we want to be called Taiwan. But sometimes the Chinese can come down very hard on this issue. You know, for example, if there's an international corporation who are willing to call Taiwan just as Taiwan, then the Chinese would use trade or business opportunities as weapon to go against these companies. And the most recent example is Lithuania. The Lithuanian government is willing to call our representative office in Vilnius as the Taiwanese representative office, which is great for the Taiwanese people. But you see how hard the Chinese government is coming down on Lithuania. So this is the international reality that we are facing. But we have to fight very hard for Taiwan's participation in international events or activities or organizations at a form that is not, at a form that we are still able to maintain our dignity. Like the name, we think that is still acceptable, or the way that Taiwan is not part of any other country.
Right. Well, thank you for that answer on IOC, but also the elaboration on the other challenges. And I hope to speak to that. And I also appreciate the history of the WHO. And we will discuss that because we obviously lived through that recently with COVID-19. And I thought the WHO's behavior has been reprehensible in this regard, particularly since Taiwan did so well with COVID. I thought you had a lot to share with the international community, but if we have time, I hope we'll get to that. So let me jump quickly to another topic. As you know, on February 7th, the U.S. approved a $100 million support contract with Taiwan for Patriot missiles. Predictably, Beijing opposed and condemned this move and demanded it be revoked. And after the November 2021 virtual meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden, Chinese state media reported that Xi had told Biden that encouraging Taiwan's independence by his administration or US supporters would be playing with fire. Now, since China has not ruled out the use of force to dictate unification, how should the administration deal with China's threats, if at all?
This is a serious issue for Taiwan, and I'm sure it's also a serious issue for the United States and other like-minded partners. If you look at Xi's statement to President Biden, supporting Taiwan is playing with fire. It's not just threatening Taiwan, it's also threatening the United States. The United States support for Taiwan is not supporting Taiwan for independence, but supporting Taiwan to remain democratic and to remain not ruled by China and to support the status quo. So the Chinese statement is something that we need to worry about. And we need to think further about the Chinese intention and their ability so that we can safely predict what China may do to Taiwan in the future. And support for Taiwan as entailed by the providence of defensive articles is one of those most important matters that the United States has been supporting Taiwan. And we are very glad that when President Trump was in office, continued to supply defensive articles to Taiwan. And because of that, we are able to get the means to be able to defend ourselves and also the service and training together with the United States. And that has enabled Taiwan to be able to defend itself. And the regularization of arms sale is particularly important. We don't have to wait for 4 or 5 years in order for a bundle to be made available to Taiwan. But now every item is evaluated on its own merit. And this is so much faster than before. And I'm very glad to tell you that the Biden administration has carried on all this very good tradition of supporting Taiwan's defensive capabilities. And we will continue to speak to the United States so that we are able to defend ourselves. The Chinese threat against Taiwan is very serious. And if you look at their air activities, it was almost 1,000 sorties last year that encroaching into our air defense identification zones. And their ships are also coming close to Taiwan's territorial water. So this is a situation that we need to watch out for. And together with their rhetorics and potential intention to use force against Taiwan, I think Taiwan needs to prepare itself. And we want to be able to defend ourselves. And the United States support for Taiwan or to provide Taiwan with defensive articles is one of the most important things for Taiwan to be able to defend ourselves.
Right.
You mentioned about democracy. Democracy is very important for Taiwan. Democracy is our way of life. And democracy is also a value that we all share. And Taiwan is willing to defend our shared values at the face of the expanding authoritarianism. And it requires all the democracies to work together.
Absolutely. And back to the issue, as you know, as many of our viewers know, and indeed as Beijing knows, the president is obligated to provide defense articles under the Taiwan Relations Act, in addition to longstanding U.S. policy. So I'm glad to see that is continuing, and your support obviously makes a difference. Now, you mentioned about security. I want to ask, what is Taiwan doing to improve its own security? And does it go as far as increasing your defense budget, modernizing your defense items and equipment? Can you elaborate a little bit on that? I know it's not in your portfolio per se, but
sometimes we joke with each other, especially the joke between myself and the defense minister, to see which position is more difficult. And I don't envy the Minister of Defense, but I think the Minister of Defense also doesn't envy my job in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But as far as I can tell, we have made more and more investment in our defense. Just to share with you some of the internal discussions. Internal discussions chaired by our senior officials and the president herself, we were talking about Taiwan's defensive capability. We don't really argue for the increase of our own defense budget. We argue for the increase of the defense budget for the Ministry of National Defense. We understand it matters to Taiwan's survival. And therefore, it is not just the Minister of Defense himself is very keen in increasing our investment in military. It's the whole government approach to increase our capability so that Taiwan is able to defend itself. And in the increase of our budget, we also need to spend money in a very smart way, making investment in the defensive articles that will make a difference, and also making investment in asymmetric capabilities so that China understands that it will pay a very heavy price if they initiate a conflict against Taiwan. And we are also engaging in a civil defense reform. The government has instituted a all-out mobilization agency underneath the Ministry of National Defense. We want the people here in Taiwan to be able to defend themselves if China is going to launch a war against Taiwan. So these are what we try to do. And the support of the United States or exchanges or training or sharing of intelligence are also very important. And we are very glad that the United States has been working very hard in these regards as well.
Well, it's very good to hear that. I know when I was Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon, we would discuss these things quite often. And our view was that you did need to take more of an asymmetric defense to modernize your strategy. So that's important. And I was a big believer that all of our allies and partners should contribute at least 2% of their GDP to defense. And I would urge you all, obviously, to go beyond that, given your situation. But your report on the civil defense is really interesting. And I've been very encouraged by what I've seen coming out of Ukraine right now, where the Ukrainian people are really standing tall and standing together and are committed to defending themselves, even if it turns into an insurgency, which would be likely the case if Russia invades. But let me pull that thread a little bit more on security, and I'll go more into your wheelhouse, and that is this. And it's a matter between both of our countries, obviously. But when it comes to U.S. security commitment to Taiwan, what does strategic ambiguity mean in Taipei? Is this policy approach still sufficient? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I understand that there's a policy debate in Washington concerning strategic ambiguity or strategic clarity. But if we hear very closely or carefully to the statements by senior military officials or defense officials in Pentagon, I think there's no ambiguity at all. The United States is highly committed to the peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait area. And I don't see any ambiguity at all. But whether the debate is going on the ambiguity side or on the clarity side, what we see here in Taiwan is that everyone seems to be very interested in providing support for Taiwan. And to us, that is a very serious matter. And it's a very important matter that people are coming from different perspectives in thinking about how better providing Taiwan with defensive weapons or to come up with defensive strategies for the United States to support Taiwan. So it doesn't really matter for Taiwan what kind of symbol, whether it's clarity or ambiguity. The support is there, and we are seeing more and more support, and that is highly appreciated.
Well, I would pleased to report to you that, as I say often, that despite the political partisanship in Washington, D.C. right now, there is bipartisan unity on one thing, and that is everybody now recognizes that China is the growing threat to us in the 21st century. And that same group of members of Congress, executive branch officials, others in D.C. also support Taiwan. So that's good for Taipei.
Yes, we are very happy about that. It used to be a red team or blue team or whatever you want to call it in Washington, D.C., but now it's all Taiwan team. We are very happy to see that the policy community in Washington, D.C. is very supportive of Taiwan. We are very happy that there's across the board bipartisan support for Taiwan on the Capitol Hill and administrations, whether it's Democratic administration or the Republican administration. Their support for Taiwan is unambiguous, and that is highly appreciated.
So you talked earlier about the day-to-day intrusions in your air defense identification zones, naval intrusions, obviously the tough, the belligerent rhetoric coming out of Beijing. How can the United States, what can we do to help you on that front? And what would you propose other than strong statements coming out of Washington and whatnot?
Well, what the United States has been doing during this period of time is to continue to monitor the Chinese activities And they understand that the Chinese way of doing this is something like gray zone. It's an intrusion, but below the threshold of the military conflict. And the Chinese would like to do that all the time. They keep pushing, but they know that war is not going to happen. And if we don't react, sometimes the Chinese would be bolden to take more actions against Taiwan. And that is not something that we want to see. And we have been discussing with the United States on these matters quite closely, how to confront the gray zone activities of the Chinese military, either to deal with their air intrusions or their slow airplanes coming very close to Taiwan's vicinity, or to deal with the Chinese hybrid warfare, or to deal with the Chinese patrol of the South China Sea and East China Sea. And this is something that we have been discussing with each other. The more important thing is for the United States to continue its freedom of navigation operations in the region. The U.S. has been doing that since you were the secretary, and the U.S. has been continued to do that, and that is highly appreciated. And conducting freedom of navigation operations for the United States is important, and mobilizing partners and allies to do it together in this region is also very important. There were several occasions where the United States is getting France, Germany, Netherlands, Canada, Japan, Australia to conduct freedom of navigation operations in this region. And I think that is very reassuring to the Taiwanese people that we are not alone in dealing with the encroachment of the Chinese military. And other than that, we also have to deal with something we call hybrid warfare,
right?
Such as disinformation campaign or infiltration into Taiwanese societies to support some of the proxies here, or cognitive warfare, trying to shape the cognition of the Taiwanese people that democracy is doomed, things like that. And we have to deal with this matter on the daily basis. And because of that, we also gain a lot of experiences in dealing with hybrid warfare. And because of that, there are more and more countries, especially in Europe, they understand that Taiwan is experienced in doing that, and therefore they want to engage with Taiwan. So this is good to increase Taiwan's international engagement. And again, we want to continue to engage with the United States to make sure that the Chinese encroachment into our ADIZ or coming too close to our territorial water will not become a source of a major conflict. And of course, the Chinese way of encroaching into our air identification zone also is trying to deplete our air defense capabilities. You know, we have limited number of our jet fighters, and if they fly too frequent, there might be pilot fatigue or mental fatigue. And that is the reason why we want to buy more jet fighters from the United States so that our Air Force can continue to defend our sky.
Absolutely. And you're right about the freedom of navigation operations. During my tenure as SecDef, I think we ran more than ever on an annual basis, exceedingly high. And we're fairly successful in getting many of our allies, some Europeans, to do so as well, which I thought was doubly important because it not just showed support to Taiwan, but it was a broad international support to defend international law and rules and norms, which China violates on a daily basis all around the world. Now, speaking of that, let me, if I could pivot for a moment. You know, up front, I mentioned that this year will be the 26th anniversary of the first free and fair elections in Taiwan. Taiwan has now become a vibrant democracy. I'm going to ask you to look across the strait and answer that. Do you think the Chinese people on the mainland aspire to live in a democracy as well, or are they content with what the CCP is offering?
This is not an easy question to answer. You know, if you ask normal people here in Taiwan, you know, we are so accustomed to this very democratic way of life. We will fight very hard to defend the freedom we have right now. But if you flash back several decades to the time when Taiwan was still under authoritarian rule, maybe a lot of people at the time will say that, oh, we are okay under this authoritarian rule as long as the economy is growing. And I think the situation might be the same in China. We understand that there are still a lot of people in China who are willing to speak up at the face of the Chinese suppression. And they are willing to take any kind of opportunity to show their opinion. And that is the source for future China's democratic development. And talking about the Chinese regime, I think it's very sad to see what happened in Xinjiang. Maybe more than 1 million people have already been camped only because they have a distinct culture. And look at what happened in Hong Kong in the course of 2020 and 2021. Originally, Hong Kong is a symbol of openness and freedom in East Asia. Now it's all gone. And that's what the Chinese government is capable of. And if the Chinese government is doing that to Xinjiang and Hong Kong, you can see how the Chinese government is doing it to its own people in the mainland. They want to continue to brainwash the Chinese people that living under communism is good and Western democracy is chaos and Taiwan is just about to fall apart. So with the brainwashing of the Chinese government, it's going to be very hard for the Chinese people to gain the accurate information from outside China. But I think there will be chances for the Chinese people as long as some people who are daring to get the right and accurate information from outside the world, outside China, and they are willing to continue to listen to the voices of their conscience. I think there's a hope for China to become democratic in the future.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned Hong Kong too. I was there in 1997 for the handover. I remember the commitments made by Beijing to the United Kingdom and the people of Hong Kong. I remember the phrase "one country, two systems." Yet we have seen the Chinese Communist Party break its word and crush the rights and freedoms of people living in Hong Kong. So I know the answer to this question, but I'd like to hear how you would articulate it. What did the people of Taiwan learn from watching this happen?
We are watching it very closely. When it was in 2019, 2020, 2021, or now, we continue to watch what happened in Hong Kong. The Chinese government promised Hong Kong not just one country, two system model back in 1997. They also promised the Hong Kong people and also the international community that the system in Hong Kong is not going to change in 50 years,
right?
50 years, half a century. But now it's all gone. So the Chinese promise, be careful. It's something that they can break easily. Don't take their words for it. And especially the Chinese government is also using Hong Kong's one country, two system model as a showcase to the Taiwanese people. They want to be able to unify Taiwan based on the one country, two system model. But we understand that one country, two system model in Hong Kong basically is corrupt. It's one country and one system. It's the Chinese communist system now. And therefore, the Taiwanese people now will not accept any kind of offer by the Chinese government that we will have a one country, two system model. We understand the Chinese promise is not trustworthy, and we will not accept the way the Chinese are imposing the national security law on Hong Kong. If you look at the reality in Taiwan, Taiwan exists by itself. It was not like Hong Kong. We have a democratic election for our president, democratic elections for our parliament, and we also have a Ministry of National Defense to defend Taiwan, and we also have a Ministry of Foreign Affairs to issue visa and passport, and we use NT, a new Taiwan dollar note, for our economy and for our merchandise, and therefore Taiwan, in effect, exists independently out of the PRC. And this is the reality. And this is the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. The Taiwanese people's commitment is to defend the status quo, to defend our democracy, to defend our democratic way of life.
And I remember at the time, Beijing was also offering Taiwan one country, two systems. And clearly, as you articulated, the fraud that they perpetrated on Hong Kong has exposed all that is not a viable path forward for the reasons you mentioned. A big concern here, and I'm sure for you and others in the region is, will China attack? Some people are concerned it could happen within a year. We've had folks at DoD speculate maybe within 5 years. I understand Henry Kissinger not long ago said it wouldn't happen at least for a decade. What's your assessment, or what's your Ministry of National Defense's assessment?
Our way of looking at this issue is not when the Chinese will attack, but to evaluate their intention. and their capability and the possible events in China or across the Taiwan Strait that will trigger the Chinese actions. If you look at their intention, I think the Chinese intention is very clear already. Whether it's Xi Jinping or the Chinese senior government officials, they continue to talk about unification with Taiwan, even though the Taiwanese people are against the kinds of unification the Chinese government has been proposing. And therefore, they are talking about not ruling out the use of force against Taiwan, a forceful reunification. That's what they are advocating. And this is something that we need to bear in mind, that the Chinese intention is very clear already. And if you look at their capabilities, I think that Chinese capabilities have been increasing tremendously in the last few years, whether it's missile capabilities, space technology, cyber capabilities, or their air force or service ships. It's beyond our imagination that China has made so much investment and have modernized their military, capable of not only striking at Taiwan, but go beyond the first island chain. So we need to develop our asymmetric warfare so that Taiwan is able to defend ourselves. And if you look at the possible events that may trigger the conflict in between Taiwan and China, one thing might come from Taiwan, and we are being very careful about that. We don't want to provoke the Chinese actions against Taiwan. Taiwan is a peace-loving country, and we want to maintain our stable line of rhetorics in thinking about the cross-strait relations, in our relations with the United States and other like-minded partners. We don't want to be a provocateur in a cross-strait conflict. And I think because of our policy throughout all these years, we have won the appreciation of the partners throughout the world that Taiwan government is a contributor to peace and stability over the Taiwan Strait. But on the other side, there's domestic politics we also need to watch out for. There's a classical theory about the authoritarian country. They like to divert domestic attention by initiating external conflict. Right. And if something is bad happening to China inside their country, for example, economic slowdown, unemployment, or major disasters, things like that, that might be the time that we need to watch very carefully. And that is something that we are watching very carefully as well. But put it together, we don't count on, the calculation of when that will happen, when the Chinese will attack Taiwan. But we are counting on ourselves that we are prepared, whether it's tomorrow or next year or 10 years from now, we will always be prepared.
Very good. You mentioned about not being provocative. I'm going to ask you a provocative question right now, nonetheless. One China policy, it's been around for 40 plus years now. I'm skeptical that it's still relevant, appropriate to this day and age, and how Taiwan has emerged and developed and where China is today. Would you want to comment on that, on the relevance today of the One China policy?
Well, we understand that the United States and other major partners of ours, we don't have diplomatic relations, maintain the One China policy. But the One China policy is very distinct from China's One China principle. And I think under your One China policy or the One China policy by other major partners of yours, we are still able to engage with each other beneath the level of a formal diplomatic recognition. For example, we are able to speak with each other on defense matters, on economic matters, and other matters. And our relations with the United States have been very strong in the last few years, and it's getting stronger. And One China policy is fine with us, even though we don't like it. But at least we are able to work together with the United States based on One China policy. And when the United States is mentioning about One China policy, the basic components of it would include the 3 communiques of what you signed with China. But there's also the Taiwan Relations Act and 6 assurances. Right. And I think these 2 major components are the most important basis for Taiwan to be able to continue to engage with the United States. And by the same token, we are also working with other major partners of yours, either in Europe or with Australia or with Japan. We don't have a formal diplomatic relations, but we continue to advance our relations with these like-minded countries, and we appreciate their support. for the peace and stability over the Taiwan Strait or for Taiwan's international participation. But if you look at China's One China principle, that is very different. They are talking about Taiwan being part of the PRC, and that is something that we are really against.
And that's one of the things that's troubled me over the years with regard to the One China policy. I think Beijing has been very successful with regard to confusing people as to what the One China policy is, twisting it to the point that too many people around the world and even Washington, D.C., don't really understand what it means. They think that it's Washington accepts Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan, and that is not the case. In fact, if memory serves me correctly, it's one of the assurances, one of the 6 assurances, tried to clarify that during the Reagan administration, that we do not accept that. We only acknowledge that the Chinese believe that. And
That's
so
right.
I think these are very important things that we need to go back and understand and relearn in some cases.
That's right. That's right. And I think that is very important to let the international community or your own people understand that your One China policy has set the major components that would allow Taiwan to continue to engage with the United States and not recognizing that China has China sovereignty over Taiwan. China's claim of sovereignty over Taiwan is accepted by the United States. And on that same note, one thing is also very important for Taiwan. We were talking about Taiwan's international participation a little bit earlier. There was a UN resolution 2758 adopted by the UN General Assembly back in 1971. In that resolution, it only talks about the PRC being the sole legal representative of China, but there's no reference to Taiwan. But the Chinese government was very good in twisting that resolution and impose its own interpretation on the Secretariat of the UN to make it sound like Taiwan is part of the PRC. So if you look at the UN statement, when they refer to Taiwan, they always refer to Taiwan as part of the PRC. And that is a wrong interpretation of the resolution. And that is also against the US position on the Taiwan or Taiwan's participation in the United Nations. And fortunately, the State Department started to speak about that. They don't agree with the interpretation of the UN or China on Resolution 2758. I think the United States now will assist Taiwan to participate in international activities or international organizations. So this is also very important.
No, that's very good. And that was going to be the next question I want to ask you, was with regard to international organizations. We spoke earlier about the WHO. I just think it's reprehensible, again, that you're not part of the WHO. It seems to me that that would be the place to begin because of the moral component of making sure that we could take care of the Taiwanese people and help you during pandemics and things like that. But where would be the next step after the WHO that you would like to see a more active role for Taiwan in an international organization? It could be the World Intellectual Property Organization or any of the others that are out there as part of the UN system.
It's a very good question. We have to start from somewhere where Taiwan's participation is being seen as morally correct. And if we are able to get the international community to understand that Taiwan's participation is the right thing to do, or Taiwan's exclusion is wrong, we need to start from somewhere. The WHO is the organization that we have been focusing on for quite a few years, and we haven't made the final result of Taiwan being an observer or a participant in the World Health Organization, and we'll continue to fight for that. Unfortunately, the United States and other key like-minded partners have been becoming more forceful in supporting Taiwan's participation in the WHO. And there are also major international organizations that we are fighting for. For example, ICAO. Taiwan happens to be an air hub. There are millions of flights coming through Taiwan's fur, and millions and millions and millions of passengers stopping at Taiwan, either come to Taiwan or go to other countries. And therefore, for Taiwan to be able to participate in ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, right, is the right thing to do. It concerns international aviation safety. And we have been working very hard on ICAO as well. And another one will be Interpol. The criminals will come and go to any country. They might slip through Taiwan and go to another country. become a problem for Taiwan or become a problem for other countries because of Taiwan's ignorance. And therefore, we are asking Taiwan, we are asking that Taiwan is able to participate in the Interpol as well. At least we are able to get access to the major criminal data so that we can identify the passengers coming to Taiwan that are safe. So this is another organization that we have been targeting for international support. But of course, there are other international organizations that would require Taiwan's participation to make it comprehensive. You mentioned about intellectual property organization, WIPO, or like OECD. Right. That is also something that Taiwan should be able to participate in a normal way. And we will try to explore the possibilities of our participation in these international organizations. Something we don't talk very often about our cooperation with the United States and Taiwan's participation in international organizations. Mm-hmm. We have a IO dialogue with the State Department, international organization mm-hmm. participation dialogue with the United States. It's been going on for quite a few years, and it's been very successful in coordinating our actions in supporting Taiwan's participation. And now we are also getting like-minded partners to talk with us on these very important issues of Taiwan's international participation. But I think the root cause of Taiwan's exclusion from the major international organizations, I would like to go back to the UN Resolution 2758. If we are not able to tackle this, it will continue to be very difficult for Taiwan's participation in major international organizations, especially those organizations that are associated with the United Nations. Unfortunately, the United States has already taken the first step, and we need to align more and more like-minded partners to speak out that the interpretation by the UN or China on that resolution is incorrect, and we need to have a room for Taiwan to play its role in international organizations. If you look at the countries in the world, Taiwan has 23.5 million people, and excluding Taiwan from international organizations, excluding Taiwan from the rights to participate and the obligation to make contribution is simply wrong. And we need to make a correction of that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you smartly chose 3 organizations to go at initially. Any reasonable person would find it hard to disagree with organizations that deal with health, safety, and welfare. And I would certainly put WHO in that first bucket. On the safety side, ICAO, as you mentioned, and safety and welfare as well for Interpol. So I think those are very smart choices. And I share the view that I think the United States and others should lead that push within the UN system to get you participatory rights in those organizations, because like you said, otherwise 23 some million people are otherwise left out of the benefits provided and the benefits that you can provide to those organizations as well. So it makes a lot of sense to me. Speaking about other international organizations and involvements, in January 2018, after the United States withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the remaining 11 countries agreed on a new one, the CPTPP. Do you think the United States should join this new TPP? And I know you probably have thoughts on your own separate free trade agreement with the United States. What are your views on each of those?
On the TPP, which is called CPTPP now, is one international trade architect that we have been working very hard for Taiwan's accession. We have already tendered our application, and we hope that there's a chance for us to discuss with the member states for Taiwan's accession. And we have been doing just that right now, speaking quietly with the fellow member states of the TPP so that there's a chance for Taiwan to be able to participate. But participating in the TPP is a rather complicated matter. It's not just a group, whether they would accept Taiwan's accession or not. As long as there's one country, it's consensus-based. As long as there's one country that is speaking out against Taiwan's accession, there's no chance for us. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you can understand that China has motivation to mobilize 1 or 2 countries to block Taiwan's participation. So this is a difficult task for us, but I think the whole nation is looking at this as a strategic objective, and we will fight very hard for that. And the complicated matter is that China also tendered its application. And if China is tendering its application, it might want to use its influence to manipulate the accession process, either for China or for other countries. But if you look at the trade standard, Taiwan standard is very high. We are meeting all the requirements of the TPP for our accession. We understand that we have to do it. But if you look at the Chinese trade standard, it's very low. It's very low. It still has nationally owned enterprises, and it's using trade sanctions against many other countries. And therefore, it would be a long time before China meets the high standard of the TPP. So that is a very complicated matter. I know the United States has withdrawn from the TPP, but if you look at the strategic dynamics in this region, in the Indo-Pacific especially, China has that intention to become a dominant power in the region. And for that, China is not only looking at its defense or military activities, it's also looking at its own trade and economic activities. And we need to come up with an architect in order to safeguard the freedom and openness of this trade system in this region. And therefore, I personally certainly hope that the United States would think about rejoining the TPP to make it strategically important to guard against the expansion of authoritarianism in this part of the world. And if the United States is willing to speak with Taiwan, either on the TPP or on the free trade agreement, I would also take a strategic high ground to look at this. The United States has been supporting Taiwan, and the United States wants to support Taiwan's economically, politically, diplomatically, things like that. And if you look at the Chinese way of trying to isolate Taiwan, they're not only trying to isolate Taiwan diplomatically, they also try to prevent Taiwan from gaining access to the military support from other countries. And very importantly, they also try to isolate Taiwan economically. And if we think that Taiwan is strategically important for the United States, the best safeguard for Taiwan economically will be an FTA between Taiwan and the United States. And if Taiwan is able to have an FTA with the United States, I can be sure that it will also help the United States economy. Look at Taiwan's investment in the United States. I think we helped create quite a lot of jobs, quality jobs in the United States. And if there's going to be an FTA, it's going to create even more jobs in the United States, which is good for the United States. And strategically, is a good safeguard for us. One of our very good mutual friend, Randy Shriver, he spoke out several occasions that the best defense for Taiwan that the United States can provide to Taiwan is an FTA.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. I think whether it's Taiwan or any other country, if you will, around the world, as we compete with China, I think it's important that we employ all powers, all of our elements of our national powers, diplomatic, military, of course, which I was responsible for, but economic, developmental assistance, et cetera, et cetera. So to me right now, the big missing piece of the puzzle is this economic outreach, either as part of a CPTPP or an FTA with Taiwan. I think would really take us a long way towards that economic integration you're speaking about, but also send all the right signals about our commitment to Taiwan, and Taiwan is a thriving democracy and self-sufficient economy. So very important. And by the way, I was in Arizona the last few days, and they're very excited about what's happening there with
TSMC.
That's right, TSMC coming. So, and it's great for the United States as well to have that resource inside the United States. So a very exciting time. Joseph, speaking of time, you've been very generous with yours. You've given us fantastic answers. One last question. As you sit there in Taipei, if you could look into your crystal ball and tell us what you think the Taipei, Washington, Beijing relationship looks like in 3 years, let's say, what does your crystal ball tell you?
Well, thank you very much for asking this question. The most unfortunate thing is that I don't have that crystal ball. But if I look at the trajectory of the cross-strait relations and the relations between Taiwan and the United States, or the relations between the United States and China, I think the trajectory is very clear. We don't see any hope of relaxation of tension in between Taiwan and China. The reason is very clear, is that China has that intention of take over Taiwan militarily. And they seem to be more and more confident of their capability. And without the strong support from the international community, or without the ability of Taiwan to be able to defend itself, it's going to be very hard to prevent China from thinking about using military force against Taiwan. And in that regard, of course, we continue to look forward to US support for Taiwan, either providing Taiwan with defensive articles or engage with each other so that Taiwan knows more about how to defend itself. And I think we also need international community support for Taiwan. For example, the major summits that the United States has participated in all came out with a joint statement to support Taiwan's international participation, or to support peace and stability over the Taiwan Strait. And I think that is very important. As long as we have that, I think this is going to be a very safeguard for Taiwan to be able to defend itself, or for the area to remain peaceful and stable. And if you look at the trajectory of China-US relations, or the US-China relations, I don't think it's going to get better as long as the authoritarianism continue to expand throughout the world. If you look at the Chinese influence, not just in Southeast Asia, but also in South Asia, in Central Asia, in Africa, even in Latin America, this is very worrisome. And I'm sure the decision makers in Washington, D.C. is also seeing this happening. If you look at the leftist governments in Latin America, it's very worrisome. They seem to have better relations with China than with the United States. And this is a phenomenon. And as long as China continues to expand its own influence throughout the world, all democracies led by the United States will continue to think about ways to counter the expansion of authoritarianism. And on that note, Taiwan happens to be on the front line. We understand our responsibility of safeguarding ourselves, but we also understand our responsibility for the rest of the democracies. And we'll continue to work together with you to make sure Taiwan prevails and Taiwan's democracy prevails. And if you look at Taiwan-US relations, I also see a very good trajectory that Taiwan-US relations have been improving tremendously in the last few years. And we'll continue to see that Taiwan plays a very positive role in the international community, so that the United States will continue to look at Taiwan as a net contributor to the international issues. When the President Trump was in office, the US started to describe Taiwan as a democratic success story, a reliable partner, and a force for good in the world. And we are very happy about that. And we also understand the responsibility of Taiwan underneath that very good remarks on Taiwan. And we'll continue to work together with Taiwan so that Taiwan can continue to shine throughout the world as a very successful model of democracy, as a reliable partner for the democratic world, and as a force for good in the world. Whenever the United States thinks that Taiwan can make a contribution on the major international issues, Taiwan will always be there.
Well, thank you, Joseph Wu, for that great answer. And I think you summed up the international situation quite well. Needless to say, when I was Secretary of Defense, we recognized that great power competition was upon us. And I made it my priority to implement our national defense strategy. And basically what we saw and said was that the greatest challenge, if not threat, facing the United States, and I would argue the world's democracies, is the rise of China in the 21st century. It all depends on which way they go. And I think it is time for the democracies of the world to unite and to bring in Taiwan and other democracies that henceforth have not been allowed to participate that way, so that we can together, defend international law, rules, and norms, defend the values that we all share, whether it's freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of speech and assembly. All those things may weigh in the balance here as China continues to rise, and disturbingly alongside Russia these days. So I think this is the challenge of the 21st century. It's great to have Taiwan as partners, and I've really enjoyed our discussion today. You, not surprisingly, provided tremendous answers and comments, and were very thoughtful, insightful, and strategic, just as we expected. So, Minister Wu, thank you very much, and the audience for tuning in to this sixth in a series of conversations I have been having with global leaders about the challenges that the United States and our allies and partners face in the years to come. So, Minister of Foreign Affairs Joseph Wu, thank you once again for a great discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. And lastly, please follow the McCain Institute on Instagram and Twitter for updates for all future events. Thank you.